recording. I need to make Reza host as well.
So I put these two links that he sent me. Take a look at it, see if you find it interesting.
Yeah, I'm opening them right now.
Okay, so share screen and
okay, first of all, he's a Chelsea fan, so this is a positive. A positive point already. Like I have a series of compositions inspired by Chelsea, and he has a series inspired by Chelsea as I see it. So
his thesis is based on Chelsea.
Okay, yeah. Mine too. My musical thesis was Chelsea and Lamont Young. So there you go.
There you go. So we did this slide. Can you see my my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So we discussed this. So should we start?
Sure.
Okay. So we reached fact and singularity. We said basically a site is a supernumerary thing within appearing. So an object becomes supernumerary because the underlying or the support set for the object it happens as Badiou uses the term that belongs to itself in terms of the effect that it has in the logic of appearing. The object whose support set is affected by self-belonging temporarily or in has a disruption. The appearing of that object in the world is disjoint from the transcendental of the world, and because of this disruption, it follows the logic from the object itself. The object becomes prescribes the transcendental for the appearing of its own object, which is another way of saying the ontological fact that it's a self-belonging. We saw that a site is of two types. Site when has weak existence, the object that becomes the site has a weak existence, and if it has a weak existence, if it's the value of its existence is less than maximal, but you call it a fact, and if the existence of the site is maximal, but you call it a singularity. So we continue the fact and singularity. 2 points that he makes that I found interesting is that the immediate reaction to the singularity from the repressive forces is to make the singularity, to regulate the singularity and bring it back to something that fits within the logic of the world. This amounts to reduce the singularity to set off a monstrous fact. So it's important because fact can fit into, although it is a site, it can still fit into the logic of the world, whereas when existence is too strong, it can't. So the first step of the repressive force would be to change singularity fact. The great example is the singularity of the love between Julie and her teacher. was, so the example of this bringing back this singularity to effect is what Monsieur Wolmar, Julie's husband, was referring to as like extreme passion that can be can fall under the transcendental of the world, which is subject to forgetting and subject to mellowing down and things like that. So I found that an interesting example. Then we are, from one hand, we have the singularity that exempts existence from the laws of being, and from the other, which is the logic of the world, we have the tendency or desire to calm agent of a rustic and familial world. And in this quotes that Badiou has, I think from Rousseau, you find, I find it very interesting that what is this tendency to basically, in the encounter with the singularity, you come back and make singularity regulated through this method. And that's the quote: a small number of gentle and placid people united by mutual needs and reciprocal goodwill, contributing in different ways to common end, each finding in his estate everything that's needed to be happy with it and not desire to leave it. They all attach themselves to this estate as though that's how they will have to spend the rest of their lives. So that concludes facts and singularities. The next topic, the next concept that you introduces is weak and strong singularities. So now we are within singularities. Singularities are the objectal sites that have strong existence. Both facts and singularities are indeed supernumerary, but as we saw, what distinguishes them is the intensity of their existence. The difference between weak and strong singularities is defined in terms of the links of consequence which the site establishes with the other elements of the object. So object itself becomes a site, becomes a strong singularity, becomes a singularity with strong intensity. And then like any other being within that world, it has, its intensity has a transcendental correlation to other intensities. What distinguishes weak and strong singularity is then the type of consequence this singularity, the singularity that we call the site, has with respect to the elements of its own multiple. If the consequence is weak, then we call it a weak singularity. If the consequence is strong, we call it strong singularity. So we remember that the consequence for Badiou is defined as the degree that is common, the highest degree that is common between two elements. So if an element A is dependent on the element B, this dependence is the degree of the commonality, the degree that is joined between element A, the highest degree, the envelope of the degrees that is joint between element A and B. So at the end, he produces a name, or he finally names the strong singularity, or the singularity that has the highest consequence, the event, and he provides a taxonomy that starts from becoming. Becoming is either modification, which is not real change, and a site which has real change. From the site, we go to two singularities. One is with weak existence, which is fact, and one is with strong existence, which you call singularity. Within the singularity, we go to, we have two types. One is with weak consequence, which he calls weak singularity, and strong consequence that he calls an event. In
Could
terms of
we could distinguish, right? So the distinction between modification and site is the site, right? Itself. So at this, it's a distinction of type of object, right?
mm-hmm.
In this object, the being doesn't come into the composition, meaning nothing of the matter of that is formed in that object is part of that object. Only the form, so the objectivating and objectivated distinction is preserved, and in the site it is not, right? Then
yeah, so the form is completely coming from the world, and the matter is not participating within the form. Yeah. Whereas in the site, the matter participates in the form. Hence, yeah. there is a competition between the form emerging from the matter and the form that belongs to the world.
Yeah. So composition is, let's say, is what will make this divide at first, because composition distinguishes, say, regular objects from sites, right? Mm-hmm. Or regular object modifications in objects from different modifications which give us sites. So once this is established, then there is a distinction between fact and singularity. Now it's a matter of degrees, mm-hmm. right? So on top of composition, a new condition, which is degrees. And then the distinction between weak and maximal is consequence, right? Mm-hmm. So it's dependent structure.
Consequence itself is a matter of degree, but
yeah, but not now. It's no longer the degree of the thing composed. It's the degree of the relation between the thing composed and other things. Yeah.
Right.
Just to show, let's say, like how like the three separate.
So one is composition, the other one is existence, yeah, and the third one is the relation.
It's consequence, yeah. Okay, no, I think that's important.
Wait, what is the connection between consequences and the dependence operator?
Yeah, because dependence operator is the operator of implication, right?
Yeah, so yeah, this part I didn't understand, because so the site has a maximal, when it's a singularity, it has maximal existence, right? Mm-hmm. And the formula for dependence is all the envelope, so P depends on Q, and the dependence of Q on P, which is written P arrow Q, is the envelope of all the degrees, such that if it's conjoined with P, is less than or equal to Q.
Correct.
And it says here is basically if P is
another way of saying this is that in terms of atomic logic is if atom A implies atom B, it means that the degree of existence for atom B is always greater than or equal to atom A.
Right, okay, that makes sense. So, but the problem now is if the site has maximal existence, then its implication with other things cannot be maximal.
Unless
the other thing is also maximal.
It's also maximal, yes.
So it only has it only implies other things if those other things have maximal existence.
Correct. But
okay, then what is a non-maximal consequence? Because
of an event? No, that for weak singularities you can get it easily, right? If the existence of the singularity is not maximal, you can get not maximal consequence.
no, but we're within singularity already here. So
Yeah, but singularity.
So the
I
weak
see.
is
How can you get these two things together? You mean?
the example that you provide is again with the Paris Commune is if Paris Commune as a singularity was a weak singularity, it would have mobilized those groups of society that already have a maximal existence, like bourgeois and military and so on and so forth. Right? So that would be a weak singularity. So in that case, they are already have strong existence within the world or maximal existence within the world. And if Paris Commune, for example, had mobilized that group instead of workers and women and proletariat, then it would not be an event.
Yeah, so let's say the singularity is S, right? And then we say existence of S is maximal. So actually S is a site. And when the existence of S is M, we say it's a singularity.
Yes.
Right, so let's say that's S star. S star is a singularity. S is the site. So, and then we're saying S star implying some other element, let's say A. And so if S star is M, then this is always equal to A. Because the envelope of all the elements conjoined with S star cannot exceed A. So that's A itself, right? A conjunction with M is A. So this is a non-maximal, like A, I mean, assuming, let's say A is like less than maximal in its existence. Versus, yeah, I mean, I guess I just don't understand a consequence. Consequence doesn't seem exactly like.
The way that he writes it later on is by saying that modification is not a site, and so we want a site that has to do with composition. And then he says, fact has a site, but the existence of the site is P, is less than maximal, right? Mm-hmm. And so we want singularity where E equal the existence of A is maximal. You have it there. Why are we doing this?
Oh, you already have it. Yeah, perfect.
So, but here's the point: like weak non-maximal consequence is just another way of saying minimal consequence. You're right. Like okay. if it is to have a consequence, it needs to be maximal, because the dependence will have to be right smaller or equal to the existence of the consequence, right?
That's for maximal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Here,
okay.
Right below.
Yeah.
But for the upper version here, here's what he writes: like the existence of A, the consequence of it, which he writes like this for some crazy reason, is mu. If it's not maximal, then it's minimal.
Here. Yeah. So the crazy thing is EA equals M here, right? When you're in singularity.
Yeah.
This part is true, right? So for this to be
what is the actual
nil?
Yeah, it's just the fact that you're trying to find you need the common value of it and this, right?
Right. That makes sense. The common of this is always nil.
If this is not maximal, the common will be nil.
Well, the thing is that says
that's this part here. This is the difference, right?
yeah,
That the nil
becomes maximal.
The inexistent is maximal. So if the inexistent is maximal, then we have like basically this, right, which is equal to m.
Correct.
Yeah. Actually, now I see the point, right? This is not. I thought of this wrong. Like this is not simply, let's say, composition, then a specification of degree, and then connection, like with the situation. This connection is still, let's say, it's just a passage from site to event. It's not the passage from site to consequences of the event, right? This is how the event acquires a consequential form, which is the relation between the maximality of the site and the maximality of the inexistent, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a maximality of the two parts of the object itself. That is the site, right? So it's like we had modifications when we had that kind of form and matter thing preserved. Then with the site, something about this matter is kind of pushed forward, right, into form itself. Then this object needs to have maximal value. So like this with a push forward thing happening. And then there's still a further condition, which is that if this, then the matter, the inexistence of it. Right? All of this happens with this. Now it looks like a Pokeball, but yeah, but none of this still concerns the rest of the situation, right? It's all about, let's say, further.
All about that object itself.
Yeah, all about that object itself.
Yeah.
So you don't need to assume that what comes on this side of the formula is external to the site. It's actually this is where the being of the site gets actually implicated into the situation, right?
Yeah, it's interesting though that he doesn't seem to measure this against any other element besides nil.
Yeah, because
like
he wants to say
on each
it is the key. He says one of the strong indication of a singularity to become an event is to bring inexistence to existence.
So that holds even for non-maximal consequences. You're still measuring against the inexistent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any consequence whatsoever must be of this form.
But
yeah, I would just distinguish here, like it's not a matter of consequence in the sense of investigations of a procedure, right? It's a matter of, I mean, to use our spectral example, right? Modifications, let's say, keep the distinction between tone, I don't know, tone system and timbre, like as a support, a material support for analysis of harmony and musical structure, right? The site brings this on top, but like it's a first step into saying that perhaps timbre has something to do with musical thinking. Then the issue is that this object, which brings that forth, needs to have a maximal existence. And then this is, let's say, that object acquiring a sort of the form of a new rule, right? It needs to acquire the form of a possible entailment. So it's not that this arrow here is just appearance. This arrow needs to almost appear like this, right? So you move from, let's say, matter on bottom and form on top to something like matter, then form, right? If this appears now, then itself as form is possible, right? That's why he says in between brackets here, subversion of the rule, right? So it's not only that events appear, but events appear with the form of a possible rule, right?
That is very important.
Yeah.
I mean, when he says that the function ID itself is subverted, right? Which is a function ID is, I suppose, is what you call the form. So as a result of the event, function ID behaves different. And this behavior that is different is that the ID of empty set, empty sub A, is no longer mu, is M. Which means that after the transcendental, so two things happen. One is event happens and existent becomes existent. But then after that, the event dissipates and transcendental takes over, the logic of transcendental, which means that that object has to have a minimal degree. But that minimal degree is no longer what was minimal. So there is another object that becomes minimal. But how would this object becomes minimal? It's by subversion of the function of ID. So this is later on, we can get to it. But
yeah, but I think that this is a crucial point, that with this little stupid graph that he creates, it's a building block of what previously in being an event was just that self-including mapping, right, of a multiple that includes itself.
Yeah, you only had that.
Yeah, here you actually construct each step of it separately, right? You shape the border between what counts and what is counted. It appears that shaping up itself appears, so the site has maximal existence. And then the relation between the objectivated and the objectivating itself appears as a sort of impossible entailment, right? Because two parts of it, the site and its own in existence, one relates to the other, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this term, impossible entailment. It's like because anything that has this maximal existence means it appears the most, right? Within the object. So we're saying that this, not only did the site appear as matter now, as the being inside of appearance, but now it's kind of interrelationship with the inexistent is appearing.
Yeah, for example, imagine a world there that doesn't have a term for one. The lowest count you can make is 2, right? So when you get to, let's say, the foundation of an atom, you get something like this, which is called 2, and you never get to expose these things that are inside of it. You never get to cover them like this. You always cover, when you have things like this, you cover them together and call it a 2, right? So we can actually play with this and create our own personal site. If we imagine, so this is how it goes with modification, right? Like something like this is preserved. For example, you can turn it into 3 or into 4 or something like this, but you never get, for example, to answer the question, what is the difference between these two, right? Which would require you to be able to say this one, right? So this has no, this doesn't appear. So site would be a situation where this way of covering
would be an object.
Yeah, the very covering, so the very relation with what is inside is at stake, right? So that this is inside of it suddenly appears, right? Not only, but then I think that this is how this part happens. You get something like this, right? You kind of decompose the matter. The matter itself is coming into play. Like this thing you don't have a name for is the stuff of two. So the matter is kind of playing a part in your analysis suddenly. But now I think that the crucial
also
part,
but also the self-belonging is there, right? The self-belonging is still a factor. I mean,
yeah, I would say that this has, yeah, but what is I'm trying to give an example where I think that self-belonging is, let's say, a way of talking about this kind of shifting perspective, right? Like, did we change anything when we looked from this to this? No, it's still the same matter. It's still the same multiple, right? But this formulation is 2. And in this formulation here, you have, let's say, 2 belongs to 2, right? This as a matter. So let me write like this. When it's the name of the set is a form. When it's inside is the matter, right? So you would get something like this actually. 1 plus 1, which is a matter, belongs to 2, which is the form. So what's inside kind of appears, which is, this would be a multiple at the edge of the void, right? You don't know how to name what's inside of it. There's no name for 1. So if you looked at this 2, and I asked inhabitant of dual lands to talk about it, he would say there's nothing inside. There's no name for what's inside, right? Mm-hmm. So when you say 2 is made of 2 things, you're actually making a sort of self-including remark, right? You're kind of redoubling the form, the site, in terms of what's inside of it. And you're counting the 2 things together, right? I'm not only seeing 2, but I'm also seeing what's inside of 2, right? What I'm trying to say is that there is something like this sort of inversion where I think what corresponds to this part here is like you're no longer counting from the standpoint of 2, but you're localizing 2 from the standpoint of what's inside of it, right? So the inside of it is if 2, then 1 plus 1, right? So it's like connecting the inside and the outside. So you're using, like, you're making the thing which was the stuff before of a form count as something that informs the situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, because I feel like it might be better to draw it as like, normally the ones would be like this, right?
Yeah.
And then this is 2. But this now is saying something like, it's more like this, right? Because since it belongs to itself, or maybe something like 1 and 1, but then both of these go back up here. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say something like this.
No, actually, 1 and 1, and there is a line from 2 to itself.
Yeah, so 2 contains 1 and 1 and itself.
Yeah. That would be a site.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, actually, because the problem with the way that I'm talking about it is that if there is no name for 1s, we wouldn't call this a 2, right? We would call it a 1. Right? And that's why this arrow exists, because once you discover what's inside, there are 2 1s, then the name of yourself is 2, right? Mm-hmm. See my point?
Distinguish yourself.
Yeah, this is a paradoxical thing. It's not a tautological thing. It's not like 2 equals 2. Is you had a name which implied that there was nothing below. Like there is nothing, or there is a 1, because I cannot distinguish what's inside. So this is the building block. It's 1, right? For example, let me get a better example. For example, in a factory, workers are bought and sold as workers, as labor force, meaning that there is nothing inside that matters. Labor force is labor force. You only measure it in terms of hours and watts, perhaps, right? So you don't care for what's inside. But there's a lot of information inside the worker, where he's from, who he is, what he's capable of, things like this. A site is a moment where this stuff that is inside the labor power appears together with the labor power, right? But that doesn't mean it appears as labor power. So it's not like this, like labor power, and then you get like some capacity 1, some capacity 2 of the laborer, right? And then labor power names itself. The moment that this appears, the name of this self-naming is different, right? Like, I'm actually a communist. So I'm actually a communist is a self-naming, it's self-belonging, but it's not tautological in the sense of the set remains itself, right? So I would put it in these 2 terms, like the more you probe into the matter of a site, the more this kind of self-reference is rich in information, right? Oh,
the more the matter self-references itself, in a sense.
Yeah. So this participates in this, right?
Because this is an index of its participation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, right? So
yeah,
it's not to say simply, let's say, what's on top here was the form, it names itself. That's not it, right? It's that there's something that didn't participate in the naming of that site that now participates in it. It remains self-belonging because this belongs to this, but it's the named part that now names, right? I think that's the important part. But I just wanted to suggest, like with my crappy example, that it's almost like you have this. So at first, the name of this thing was just an identity, right? Sorry, let me put it like this. So when the name of this thing is an identity, it's just its existence, it's a modification. When what's inside of it participates in the naming, that's a site, right? If this now has maximal value, it's a singularity. But then the issue is that you don't want this arrow to be just an arrow of it belongs to itself. You want it to be an arrow of implication, right? So if the site is maximal, then let's put it like this, right? The inexistence of that object. Then the inexistent is maximal, right? So you get a kind of inverse arrow as well. Because if this movement happens, then now from towards the inside also happens, right? Something like this.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Because
does it make sense?
Yeah, well, it points to a deep relation between the inexistent of the object, which is the site is also part of, like, you have this whole object, right? This is the object. And then you have the site inside of there, and you have the inexistent. And we're saying actually that within the inexistent,
the object is site itself. So the site is the object.
No, I don't think. I think the site belongs to the object.
No, the object.
No, he writes it as an object. Yeah.
Yeah, the site is an object.
Yeah, but the object is defined by the atoms of the object anyway.
Yeah,
here for an
Because
object
how can you do dependence? So it's an object dependent with a part of itself? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, just take like a sound. A sound includes the timbre already, right? But the timbre is a totally objectified part of the sound. The moment that the timbre objectifies, meaning it starts, the resonances of the violin start being relevant, that means that it's not only the objectified part, it's the objectifying, it participates in the objectification of what comes later, right?
I see.
Yeah, it's like it becomes a criterion for the continuity. That which was concealed but within the situation becomes the criterion for the continuity. Like,
yeah,
you didn't take it into account, and now timbre is, the criterion for doing something.
I like this way that I wrote it here. I think it seems to me it leaves to capture the essential, right? This distinction between the objectifying part of the object and its inexistence. If that distinction is preserved and relations are at even kind of self-referential, are just the identity of the object with itself, that's a modification, right? So for example, I change with age, but I remain myself. Nothing of what makes me, my stuff, gets in the way of that identity, right? So the distinction is preserved. If the distinction is not preserved, and the thing that didn't count, that was objectified, the inexistent, starts to participate in the self-reflection, then you get a sight. If an object whose inexistent participates in its reflection has a maximal value, then it's a singularity. And then I'm thinking this seems to me, this dependence here seems to me to imply the inverse error.
Actually, the example of the spectral analysis, or your example that that an object has certain attributes or certain atoms, if you will, but those atoms that are part of the object do not in modification, do not participate in naming or identifying the object. The object is identified separately by the transcendental of the world. Something happens ontologically to that object that part of the object participates in the naming or identification of that object. I get that a lot better than the concept of self-belonging.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking that, you see, we can actually talk about the construction, like if let's say the last form, the obvious form is this, the object belongs to itself.
I mean, the concept of self-belonging seems to be working for Badiou because it is a non-axiomatic, a forbidden move in ontology.
Yeah.
And so yes, that's fine. Event is a non-axiomatic thing, and that's why it's temporary, or it's evanescent. It comes and goes. But I think the metaphor of form and matter, I said it last time too, works a lot better. So basically what we are saying, and this works in the appearing a lot better than ontology. That's why the theory of events is so much richer here, because it has a lot more tools to deal with than in ontology. The concept here is, I'm running it by Dennis, see if it makes sense to him in this case. What we are saying is that part of the attributes of the object, what part of what object collects becomes what identifies the object. So what is inside participates in what the object is identified from outside.
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it. But what I'm trying to suggest is that there is a bit more than simply, I mean, I think that you only get to here if you get, again, in terms of this distinction, an object whose inside does not participate, so reflection is external. Then with the sight, you get an object whose inexistent participates in what it's called. Here you get the fact that this relation or this self-reflection appears maximally, which is a singularity. But then you need, this is where I think this thing here is very surprising, which is it really gives you the anatomy of constructing something like a self-belonging, because now once this has been established, which is what he calls E of A, the existence of the sight, you get here a dependence relation with the inexistent, which is an arrow like this, back inside, right? If the sight is maximal, then, and this is the implication here, right? The inexistent, which is inside, is maximal. So you construct step by step. Yeah.
If you go back 2 steps, I would say that inexistent is what comes outside in order to name the sight itself.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to suggest is that this is beyond naming, because it's now a matter of consequence, right? So it's like you're stitching it together, like the two sides of the self-reflection. It's like half and half. If it's a sight, it goes only half from the inside out.
But look at it this way. So it is a move inside and out, but look at it this way. So we already said, right, something in the matter of something that is inside comes outside to identify the object, right?
Yeah.
So look at it this way. If what comes from inside in order to identify the object from outside is an atom of the object that itself had a maximal existence, then it will be a weak singularity. Whereas if what comes out of inside in order to identify the object is the inexistent of the object, it is an event.
Yeah, because
I'm sorry, I got a bit confused there, but sorry, Dennis, yeah?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the one thing, when he talks about the subversion of the rule, what is one rule that identity relies on? It's that there can only be one maximal element, right?
Yeah.
Because if 2 elements are maximal, we can show that they're indistinct. You can't distinguish between them. So this formula here about when both A, the entire object, and its inexistent are both maximal, that means the entire object cannot be distinguished from its inexistent in that moment, right?
Yeah.
If they both have maximal existence, from the standpoint of identity, we can't say they're any different, although we know they're different on some level. So that's also another way to read that self-reference means for a moment something becomes identified with its inexistent. Just also has that kind of Hegelian feel to it, like.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we can collect those consequences, because you're right. Like if you get that equation right, sight, the one that he writes for strong singularity, right? EA implies E of A. This is maximal. That means that you can't really distinguish the two, right? Meaning that the object itself comes to be defined by, I mean, it's nothing prevents you from saying that the object is formed by its inexistence, right?
Yeah. If you put on the ontological glasses, you can still tell the difference between inexistent and A, because they're sets. I mean, they're multiplicities, which are, I mean, one's a multiplicity of some, you know, even though it's inexistent within the object, it actually has some content ontologically. So ontologically, you can tell the difference. But if you were to put on the phenomenological glasses, you could not tell the difference at that moment between the sight and the inexistent.
So this is what I was saying metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an object. If this object basically changes through its appearing and becomes, keeps its constitution, keeps its identity, this is called modification. However, if the object in its constitution becomes not A itself, but say A star, thereby something from inside contributes to the identity of the object or how it's constituted, then it's a singularity. So this is a space of singularity. But if a non-existent element makes this contribution, it's a weak consequence. However, if this, which is the non-existent, makes the contribution, it's an event. Now, this is a move from inside to outside, but as
the last part I was a bit confused. Because
go ahead.
So just to explain it to me a bit better, because I had the impression that weak singularity meant that even though the inexistent, so something inside the object participated in its identification, what is not happening is that you cannot, let's say, entail the inexistent from that new identity.
Right. So the diagram, yes, absolutely. So the diagram that I'm writing seems to be in contradiction with the language of consequence, because the language of consequence seems that the object, which is A, is implicating the elements inside, whereas the arrow seems to be from inside to outside.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that actually what's going on is that you have, you know, like the expression self causation. We always think of it as one operation, and Badiou is actually dividing it into two. Singularity concerns self, but then you still need to figure out the causation. So just because something refers to itself doesn't mean that that reference can function as an implication of its content.
Right. So what I think is happening is exactly this. You're right. So that when this excited state, if you will, this excited state happens, this excited state means that what is inside is coming outside in order to identify the object, right?
Mm-hmm.
This excited state itself is caused by the existence of this thing. Is if the existence of this thing can excite the element internally in order to participate in identification of that object. If this excitement, right? If this excited state implicate the objects that are existent, so that those existent objects, existent atoms come to participate in the identification, then it's a weak consequence. If it excites in a way that the non-existent itself participates in the identification of object, it's an event.
So I think a good example, just to help with that, like imagine the following. Somebody's playing a melody and they're actually scratching the limit of the instrument in some way, like holding a note for very long, to the point that the imperfections in for example, the string become perceptible. You start listening to the instrument where the music is being played. You're not listening to the music. You're listening to the music plus the instrument that's making the music, which you were already listening to, but somehow the let's say the violin is appearing together with the sound, right? This is a singularity, because let's say it's now the maximal moment of intensity in the song. Like it was that long note that is very determining, and now that long note that is determining appears not only as a note but as a faulty timbre. That's not enough for it to be an event, because you need that sound to entail new stuff about timbre. Like if you were to suddenly play the next note in such a way that you consider now from now on the timbre as well, that's weird self-causation, because the timbre is a matter that interrupted a form, but now that interruption causes it no longer to be an interruption, right? I played a note, it sounded weird. That weirdness comes from a kind of a threshold of the instrument. So the timbre is getting in the way of the sound. If that has maximal existence, still there is one step missing, which what makes it self-causing, in fact, because the thing that was formed by the sound, which was the timbre, now needs to be causing the timbre to function as a rule.
Yep.
Right? So it's a separate third condition, which, and again, it's funny because
like the accidental happening of certain grain. We call this kind of accident grain of a timbre, right? Grain. The accidental happening of a grain doesn't make it musical material.
Exactly. And
Like
everyone will be able to say the connection
musical material
between...
is melody and harmony. So you play the violin, and then there's a certain grain coming up, and you, well, what can I do with this? And there are historical examples. Perhaps an example from jazz would help. Like, I'm a big fan of Ornette Coleman. This is a guy who didn't play his saxophone properly, in a sense. Like, he played well, he was sensitive, he had a sense for melody and all that, but every now and then there was a squeak happening, or some weird grain coming up. And then he had like, we will be talking about the theory of points, right? He had an option. Should I how do you say that, suppress this element and become a proper musician, or should I make this element the new rule of my practice and make it a part of the musical material?
Yeah, I think it has everything to do with that. For me,
this is what's at stake.
Yeah. So, but for example, weak singularity, I think it's like noise interrupts, grain interrupts the musical material. It is visible as part of the musical material. Somebody who would describe that note would feel compelled to say it had a lot of grain, like that appeared together with the note you're playing. But
maybe even as a mistake, you say it was a mistake.
Yeah, or even if not, you can say something like, but it's the guy's style, or he doesn't play so much. Like, you can even accept regularity, but it's not a singular regularity. Like, so you will just, let's say, nothing of that note entails the material grain. So that's why I want to clarify that it's very crucial, that weird step where this composite object made of like musical material and grain, something in an arrow inverts midway through, where now you say, well, if this appeared, then the grain is not grain, right? The grain is actually
a musical material.
Yeah. So,
but you have to make an option for that.
Rule,
I think
like you
this
said.
is what you are aiming at. You have to choose to make the grain the musical material.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just the self, but it's the causation as well.
Exactly.
The causation comes when you choose to make the grain the musical material. Otherwise, the grain is just an accompaniment or something that is there, but it's not really central.
Your example is a lot better, but your example reminded me of this. Lately, I had, I bought, or somebody bought for me a gramophone, like the old style gramophone. And he referred me to a book that is called Revenge of Analog. I don't know whether you have seen that book or not.
No, I don't.
a lot of things analog are coming back in a style, like typewriters, for example, are coming back. A lot of people are going back to write things with typewriters. But anyway, one of the elements.
This is one of my works.
Which one? Yeah. Well, there you go.
It's commercial.
So this is Revenge of Analog. There you go.
I know what you're talking about. This is a cassette tape.
So they say that the crashing noise that the spindle of the gramophone has against the gramophone disc is part of the whole experience of listening, say, to jazz music or listening to a particular type of music. And before, when this noise was accompanied, it was just an accompaniment. But now people are making a decision to make it part of their musical experience. They go back to gramophones in order to actually particularly listen to that sound as a part of the overall repertoire.
But you see, like, this is perfect example of weak singularity, because look at the difference between, I put it like this. You have here noise and I don't know, sound, or whatever you want to call music, right? So noise and music.
Can use sound. Traditionally, sound is pitched noise, right? So
yeah, so perfect. Yeah.
Sound. So
yeah, so let's have it like that. So noise and pitch defines itself only by relations of pitch, and noise is inside. A sight, for example, would be a moment where you can't really describe what's going on without considering the fact that the pitch was tainted by the grain, right? But for example, you can get a fact, which is simply a statement that note had some grain. It's not a maximal existence of this, right? So it's still, the noise affected the grain, the matter affected the form, but the value of this, I mean, it's definitely lower than the value of the perfect note, right? But let's say that this was made in a moment of great intensity. So you would say in this case that, like, I don't know, some kind of very grainy voice singing where, oh, this is part of the style. It's so characteristic of that voice.
Who was right? The sax player, you said?
Or Nat Coleman. But like, for example, a voice, you recognize the grain very much. And you say it's singular, that voice. That grain in Louis Armstrong's voice, like, it's so recognizable, right? Okay, but then the question is this just something like your, let's say, the charm of the grain inside? And I ask, what does this do? You say nothing. Like, this doesn't do nothing. It's just, I like it to be there. But I mean, like, this border is very much respected. Like, nobody gets to live in terms of rules, norms, and forms. Like, I know what my forms are like, but I like a little flavor, right? That's totally different. Spice. Yeah, it's a spice. Here it's like a spice. It's like aesthetically pleasing to enjoy some grain. But here is not aesthetically pleasing. It's aesthetics itself, right? Like, that's why it's not about this. It's then about this, right?
Yeah, it's
and then
like
the name of this no longer can be pitched. Like, you
have Louis Armstrong on the top and Ornette Coleman on the bottom there.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Like, yeah, I like that.
or you have spicy food from the West on top and Korean spicy food on the like, spice is really the material.
Okay, so let's come back here. I guess we covered the whole lot. Like, actually, that was a tour de force of the entire book.
It's amazing how much of the stuff that came before is mobilized, isn't it? Like
this conversation, yes.
Yeah, it's you actually see it was not for nothing.
No, it was amazing.
And I think the bit on the theory of points might be just 2 meetings as well. It's not really that much.
Yeah, Though I think that it's one of the parts of the book that I have a lot of like not issues but questions about how to develop, because I feel it's also very condensed. Like
Yeah, it's very condensed.
the part about topology, I think it's fine. Like I don't know what else to add, but the way of filtering one transcendental through another and that whole discussion, I have the impression that there might be ways to refine that.
Yeah, he wants to filter a multi-value transcendental through a bipolar transcendental, right?
Yeah. I wonder if you couldn't have, I mean, especially considering what he did recently, like his idea of, you know, happiness is connected with is a function of being capable of changing between logical spaces. Like a happy person is a person who knows when logic is consistent, paraconsistent, or intuitionistic. It's the weirdest definition of happiness ever.
You know, the world of the happy man is different from the world of the unhappy one.
Yeah, and he's perfectly capable of
Wittgenstein. It's not, happiness is not a function of yourself, it's a function of your world.
So you guys want to go through the rest? I mean, I think we covered the whole thing. I think.
Well, just let's give it a cursory reading then, just to
so
go
the weak singularity. I think.
No, I actually have two questions that we could work on. Then one is in this thing here that you quoted. I really like this statement, which I find very incredible. That the measure of a beginning is what else can begin from it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really, I mean, we were talking about the difference between Louis Armstrong and Ornette Coleman, right? And the question of, I mean, we already made a distinction between facts and singularity, right? Or facts and events. And I was saying that I think facts are sites where a conversation ends, right? Look, man, that appears, period, right? And events is more like, okay, what follows from it? So I think that this is a statement that has more than it seems, you know.
Yeah, I really like this too. I think one thing we always discussed in Pensée and in the circle, this idea that what you know is measured by what you can teach.
Yeah.
You know, like to know, and there's a strong and a weak version of that. The weak version, which is like kind of a commonplace. If you know something really well, it's easy for you to teach it to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
But the strong version of that statement is to say that you actually don't ever know anything unless it's in the act of teaching. Yep. So it's the teaching which makes the knowing.
Yeah. So the measure of the teaching is the other, right? It's not a matter of the good teacher is the one who passes on what he knows, but you find out what you know by what the other learns, right?
Yeah. So actually the measure of knowing is teaching in this case.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they're indistinguishable in that moment. Just like right? You can say that the ignorance of the student is an inexistent. The knowledge of the teacher is the object. And if the causation is maximal, means that the ignorance of the student becomes indistinguishable from the knowledge of the master or the teacher, right?
Yeah, to the point that it's right, because it leads to some level of entailment even, right? So
it's entailment, exactly.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I was very taken. Example. Yeah, I was very taken by this idea of measure here, right? Because it actually remains in line with that principle that I like very much, the idea that, you know, one thing to measure another needs to be of the same quality of the thing that it's measuring. Because so you can only measure a beginning by beginnings. You cannot measure a beginning by something else, right? It kind of keeps to that as well.
Yeah. The beginning, so like, if applying again to the knowledge example, like we usually take our knowledge to be kind of like, I learned it way back then, now I know it. And so there's a beginning to my knowing, and then everything else is a continuity of knowing something. But what if we were to reinterpret knowing as something which is always only a beginning? So
yeah, I think another way of putting this that perhaps is a bit more kind of obvious is that, let's say, A only teaches B, so how much was taught here of knowledge is actually a function of how much B can teach C.
yeah,
So if you didn't, let's say, if what you taught B doesn't allow B to teach C, then you didn't really teach B to begin with. I mean, this
exactly.
is how Rancière distinguished between what he calls, what's the thing about the crappy teaching?
Explanation or whatever. Right?
Yeah, there's the sort of explication rather than teaching. Like explication is when, though I pass knowledge to B, B is always inferior to A, because after all, he learned from A, therefore A is the teacher, B is always the student, right? And Rancière said, well, but this other method of teaching called the emancipatory teaching is one where B learned if B became the teacher, right? So as you were saying, then, is if you can no longer distinguish A and B, right?
Yeah, and I like this too. Yeah, because it means that the knowledge of A is suspended until B teaches.
Yeah, like you need to teach. I mean, it makes perfect sense. You don't only teach, but you need to teach how to teach. So it is self-belonging.
Yeah.
Actually, I thought that the metaphor works in this way: that the knowledge of A is suspended, or A is indistinguishable in terms of its existence from B, is because the teaching, which is the measure of knowledge in this case, the knowledge that is coming is through the teaching that comes. So there is a difference between A and B for sure. One of them is teaching and one of them is being taught, right? But that's the only difference that is there, not in the level of knowledge, because while A is teaching, is learning, so does B. While the teaching is taking place, both A and B are learning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's you're learning as you're teaching it.
Yeah, but
it's another way of saying that.
Yeah, but
so
I would
as
be
the
against
function
that.
of teaching takes place, two entities are learning, both A and B.
Yeah, but I would be against that, because now, after our discussion, I take as a new banner in my life to say that self-causation is actually a two-part process. There is no self-causation. Self-belonging is, let's say, the illusion of kind of one thing with itself, because it actually takes many steps. So the two interpretations we're giving are very good, because for me, what you guys are saying is actually the postmodern teacher who says, it's not really that I am teaching B, is that while I'm doing this, B is teaching me.
Yeah.
I'm skeptic of this sort of kind of automatic self-reflection, and I propose that the materialist version, it takes two steps, just like here it took more steps. Like, first step, A teaches B, but suspends calling this teaching until the second moment where B teaches C. And if this is verified, then this was a teaching. So ultimately, it's true that B affected something back on A, but the two arrows are separate. Like, there's always an effort of composing the two arrows, you know? Like, you cannot say teaching does like this, because this arrow in reality is actually like this, like half an arrow and then half an arrow.
But in that example, B in the second example is not the matter of the same constitution anymore. It's the whole discussion here is that the matter in this case, which is the novice or the uneducated, becomes part of the identification of the whole constitution.
Yeah, but you're
Whereas
assuming that the relation is binary, teacher and learnings and student, sorry, right? And you're saying that this can happen like this, like the teacher teaches the student who teaches the teacher.
Right.
And I'm
So
saying
that is
that this cannot happen. That what needs to happen is that for the student to be the teacher, you actually need both things to happen. You need this, and separately you need this. Like they're two things. And that doesn't mean that, I mean, for the student to become the teacher, he needs to teach somebody, a student.
no. What I'm saying is within the same object. Within the same object that this has to happen.
Yeah, but that's why I don't think that teaching is evental. I mean, I accept it's evental in this form that you teach.
But even in the spectral analysis, I mean, the example that you guys provided is, or in the example of Ornette Coleman, it is the same composition that becomes evental, right? It becomes evental. It causes other compositions whereby it's a new style altogether. It makes a complete new style of playing, but within the same composition, it becomes evental.
Yeah, no,
So
I think that can be the case. That can be the case. But again, two things. If it could not entail other pieces of music, I don't think it would be evental.
That is true. That's
the first point. And the second point is that all I'm saying is that logically, there are two parts to self-reflection and not one. I think that's a crucial point. Like we did say, like the noise participates in the pitch, but then there is an entailment relation between, you know, this new pitch and further noise. And I'm trying to say that these are these two parts here they can appear separately, right? You can have an entailment like pitch will change noise, and it makes no sense because noise didn't even appear. So this is crappy, like just this side A. And you can have something like noise relates to pitch, which is like the singularity of a voice, the B point. And that doesn't require the entailment. So you actually need two arrows to get this to function like self-reflection. So
yeah, like the noise is in the pitch, as Raz is saying. It was always in the pitch in a sense, but you need two acts in order to make it the musical material.
Yeah, and I think that this is important because
this appearance, this sheer appearance, which is necessary, but not sufficient. To be sufficient, you have to. So you have to make it a structural principle. I will use this noise further as musical material, because otherwise it can be a decorative element. You know, you can just proceed normally playing or singing traditional songs with a voice like this, like Tom Waits or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really the use of the noise is not really consequential.
Yeah,
so
I think that's actually a really good good description for weak singularities, which is decoration. Like,
yeah,
it's valid for politics. Like somebody who has no voice suddenly speaks and is allowed to participate in the naming of a company. Oh my God, like the workers are naming their work environment, but like, okay, but does this entail anything? Nothing. It's like a flavor. It's like a decorative thing, right?
Yeah. So it seems that you guys agree with the two-step thing. Let me see if I get it. I still believe that in order for an object to become evental, this happens within the same constitution.
I agree.
Right? Yeah. So it is like part of what the object contains becomes something that contributes to the identification of that object.
Mm-hmm.
But you call it ontologically self-belonging.
Yeah.
I don't know whether this is self-belonging or something else, but let's say that ontologically it is self-belonging, but logically it is what we say. It is that what object contains becomes part of what this object appear as or is identified as. So it changes the rules of the transcendental of the world.
Not yet. That's what I'm saying. At that point that
Not
you
yet.
just
This
said
is the first act yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me understand this. So
this is the first act.
So for
like,
for
okay,
this
go on.
For this thing, for these two things to be different, we need this participation of the matter in the form.
Yeah.
Right? So this participation of the matter in the form in this case is making the form or the object excited in a way. I call it excited, but let's say that the object excited in a way that is different than the transcendental of the world.
Yeah, I think we could call it deformed, right? It deforms the object.
So this is already deformed. This is already departing from the transcendental, this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, so, it's departing, but not necessarily in the sense of changing it. It can just mean, for example, these are modifications and workers are on strike. Workers that are immigrants are stopping a factory because they're immigrants and they're complaining about immigration laws. Like, they're not appearing as workers. They're deforming their role as workers based on a quality that shouldn't count.
Okay, so let's continue. So far so good. Now in here, if this deformation, if this new excited state for this object has weak existence, so it is a fact. If it has a strong existence, which means that with respect to the transcendental of the world, it all of a sudden becomes very, very noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
It appears strongly in that world.
So for example, to use an example here, immigrant workers, for example, appeared as immigrants, but that's like a statistical pool. We found out that many workers in this factory are all from this other country. It's a fact. It doesn't really change anything. But if you learn that information because they stopped the factory that produced some important product, you will learn that in a maximal way.
Right.
Right. But that still can be just a monstrous thing. Like it's an anomaly, a deformation with no consequence, or it can have consequences.
Okay, so let's stop here. So in that factory, we learn about something about we learn about the constitution of the workers in that factory. But if that learning is just a learning that has no strong appearance, it's a fact. But if that knowledge somehow registers strongly within the world of that factory, either by stopping, let's say, stopping its, or by changing the shape that factory is, let's say that there are Muslim workers in that factory that all of a sudden disrupt the production process at their prayer time, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So that appears very strongly in the life of that factory because the factory stops. It is the prayer time, right? So that becomes a singularity. Now, if this factory that is now defined by what it constitutes, which are the immigrant workers, so what's the example of a consequence then in that case?
For example, imagine the following. Now the manager says, no, we can stop at prayer time and you get back to work later. Like this is a noise we can tolerate.
Yeah, it's a weak consequence.
Yeah, it's a very weak, like it says there is no connection between the noise and work. We're just gonna we're tolerating company, we're gonna respect that. This is actually gonna increase, like we exist so maximally that we can actually tolerate that sort of noise, right?
So this is the weak singularity.
This would be the weak singularity.
Yep.
Another thing is for you to take that interruption as proof itself that the factory actually is something else. It's the place of the workers. Meaning, like when the guy comes and says, "Look, guys, we'll tolerate you stopping." Somebody says, "But who are you to decide? You think praying depends on you to happen?" At that moment, something is at stake of the transcendental. Like, it's true, it's self-causing. The very stopping of the prayer is now turning the praying into, let's say, something which assigns the rule of that group rather than the work time. This example was actually very beautiful. Like, but it's the rule itself. Like the praying itself is assigning the rule. But logically, you can distinguish the two moments, because that second implicative part could have not a reason.
Now
So
I'm trying to find out what is the inexistent in this case that they have.
It's their nationality or their religion, or there is a strong determination of ethnicity and a lot of other informationally rich aspects of the working people's life that don't count from the standpoint of the factory. I don't care where you're from, right? I don't care, or your customs, don't care anything about, like, that doesn't matter. Which is exactly what it means to treat something as a material.
This example seems to be working well.
Yeah, that example is actually a very beautiful example.
Right.
But I think it's a good way, right? There is something that existed in the object as it's inexistent, like it's localized on the factory time. Abstract.
So if we begin to basically influence the rule of the factory based on an inexistent element, which is the ethnicity of a group of workers who were indistinguished before, then we are talking about the maximal consequence.
Yeah. So it is like, if you look at it, it's self-causing, because the answer to the question, what created a new rule, is the very thing that made the rule appear, right? The workers that are stopped to pray, let's say they are interrupting, and then you ask, where does interruption come from? And the answer comes from the same place. So they were changed, and the thing that made them change in the world is also the thing that creates a new causal force. So it is a loop, but you can split the loop in half and be a more materialist Hegelian and say, it takes two to tango. Like, it takes two to make the complete loop logically, right? Lacan has a similar point with the problem of haste in logical time, when he says, well, sure, if you look from the outside, you see somebody kind of self-causing, because the solution to the sophism is, I moved because this way I could say I was white, like my disc is of a certain color. But logically, there's actually a scansion inside that self-reflection, right?
Yeah, and we can actually think of there being an actual chronological gap between the first and the second parts. They don't have to happen at the same time. It can be 10 years ago, the first part happened, and then 10 years later, the return movement happened.
Yeah, true.
Right. So, and that's kind of what you could say maybe hegemony, or like readings of history in which like the past can be redeemed by what happens in the present.
Yeah.
Right. And without the theological like weight to that, but like you can change the past in a way. That's what the event, I think, stands for, right? The event redeems the past as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's another good reason why you might want to keep the two parts of this. the formless matter of an object participating in the identification of what's going on take us as far as a singularity, because as we were saying, like the grain, the noise of a sound helps to situate the sound. It gives it a body. Why not? Right? That's Louis Armstrong's voice. It has to do with, I can hear the grain and I know that the form comes with that matter, right? But that matter is not, it is treated as matter. It is treated as a sort of decoration or a sort of acceptable deformation, right? There's still a kind of, the participation in the identity still needs, let's say, the inverse link, which is to say, if there is a voice that comes with that grain, grain and voice are not so distinct after all. Like, there can be some crazy guttural singing where the grain will take the first role. So that completes a self-causation, because the matter of the voice called the voice to be included in the matter, right? But you kind of, it's interesting logically at least to show that this can be stopped halfway. And I think it even leads to a nice theory of a sort of the connoisseur of singularity, right? Which I think the analog metaphor, the example that you gave, Reza, is really good. You know, like the interest in the singular as singular, right? I'm interested in the way things are deformed. But then you say, okay, but what follows from that? Nothing. All I can do is passively savor the ways that matter deform forms. But that's as far as I can go. Like, there's still something that can happen, right?
Interesting discussion. So you want to go to other concepts, existence of non-existence.
Mm-hmm.
So that you say is that, as we talked, an event is measured by bringing non-existent to maximal existence. Basically, that's what he says. And he uses Paris Commune, that a group of workers who had no political existence before all of a sudden constitute the three-quarters of the committee who signs the Declaration of the New Republic. It was an unbelievable thing. So one night they weren't, they did not exist. The next night they are basically proclaiming something about the whole republic.
It is totally crazy.
The ontological support for the inexistence is an element that, while it belongs to the, so this is the definition of inexistent. The inexistent is something that has an element of an object that has no, the transcendental degree is nil, and also there is only one non-existent. It's an, and the third thing is that non-existence is always an atom. So we showed that, we proved that in previous book. Dennis reviewed that. The definition of an event says that the entailment of E naught, which is nil, by EA, which as a singularity has maximal degree of M, is maximal. This means that EA is M, which is the hypothesis of singularity. EA implies E naught, hypothesis of strong singularity. That means that, which means that E naught is bigger than EA, which is definition of implication, which means that E naught is greater than or equal to M, which is the consequence. So if inexistence comes to be as a result of the site, a singular site, it means that that existence all of a sudden absolutely exists.
I have a question. Just perhaps not, there's something I'm missing, but just to go, can you go back to the previous slide just a second? You know, people complain a lot about Badiou being this sort of heroic thinker of miracles and so on. And I think we established that this is not really the case, but there is one thing that I wonder if it's necessary, because everything here concerns maximality, right? Singularity is maximal, and then consequences as being maximal. Like, if would it disrupt his theory to have, let's say, substitute maximal existence for high existence? Like, to have, if you had a gradual theory of events, like this had a very low existence, now it has a high existence, much higher.
I don't think it matters.
It doesn't, does it?
No, I don't think it doesn't matter in his algebra for sure.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Like, formally, there's nothing that requires things to be so, like,
black and white.
Black and
binary.
white. Is there? I mean, is there a reason why you can entail things in an event only because it's maximal?
Well, actually,
I mean, I know this will restrict, like, if it didn't appear very much, you can't really entail the inexistent very much. It can have, that entailment can have some P existence, but that's not a modification, right?
Yeah, no.
So I wonder if there isn't some interesting work to be done there with a slightly different, if that's the case, if it isn't possible to talk about sort of differential of existence rather than an absolute value, right?
I don't know. I mean, this is probably a mathematical, I mean, from what I see, that his algebra that he's using, the minimal algebra he's using, is not going to be affected. But and he's saying that there is no particular math, like a theory, like growth and the topos or something behind what he's saying here. But nevertheless, I wanted to ask this question: is there an underlying mathematical constraint that it has to be the maximal degree?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Because I think if there is, it has to do not so much with the appearing. I mean, I think that the constraint concerns the change in the transcendental. Like, if no maximal degree appeared, I wonder if a change in the transcendental is needed, you know, is implied by this process.
Let's say that if we wanted to, so this part, this part is either or.
Yeah.
Either the matter participates or it doesn't.
Yeah.
To what degree it participates, to what degree the grain becomes part of the identification of the voice, we don't know. But the fact that grain becomes part of the identification of the voice is an absolute difference between these two, right?
Yeah.
But in here, I don't know what maximal existence versus some P that is greater than mu, but it's a large value, would make a difference between this and this. I don't know.
Yeah, I have the impression that it is actually necessary, because now that I think of it, because if you oppose it to facts, right? And that idea of stopping a conversation or starting something, like if something appears and it's materially ingrained, like, again, the matter participates in it. It's not just another case, right, of something that is a form already we know of. It's a fact. That to trump a fact, meaning it's not only that that object appeared with its particular participatory structure, but that there is nothing more visible than it that it can be subsumed under. So that's why it becomes a singularity. It's not the case of the world. It's not something that allows you to turn to the world and say, this is an instance of that. That's the fact, right? The world is confirmed by this intensity. It's the maximal intensity there. I think it's a way of saying that the analysis is now localized on that object. It's no longer the object localized on the rest of the world. That's what maximality would imply. There's nothing that exists more than it that can account for its existence better than it can, right? So I think maximality there is actually necessary.
Okay, so it makes sense here. It makes sense here. The binary thing makes sense here and here. How about here?
Yeah, and then I think it's logically necessary, as you were seeing, right? Either the inexistent is maximal, or the implication is always mu. Yeah,
he makes it very explicit that event brings to existence an inexistent.
Yeah.
Because if it's not an inexistent, then the implication is basically activating or elements that were already visible.
Yeah, and I think the grain actually can go into that. Like, for example, the spectralist movement is not simply grain of the timber. It's actually, let's say, stuff about timber that was there and you didn't know, like, you know, the dynamic disposition of how it affects harmonics and things. Like, it's not only there is timber, right? So, or the voice has grain. So
yeah, like the timbre becomes the principle of organization of the whole thing.
Yeah, which means you need to touch something that was supposedly disorganized, right? Yep. You assume timber wasn't organized in that way. So I think maximality there is, I mean, if it isn't inexistent, meaning something which was supposedly disorganized on its own, that begets the form of organization, it needs to be maximal. Otherwise, the connection is always minimal. So I think it's actually required that it be maximal.
It looks like it.
So it means that, let's see, that doesn't really prevent us from having a more gradualist, less heroic view of Badiou, but it's not the issue of the maximality of events that is going to settle that. Okay, but that's just something I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, that was very interesting. So that is the inexistent. So this is more of the same stuff. The ontological precariousness, the unfounding being dissipates itself in that which it brings. So he basically makes a comment that, well, he says that how could an inexistent come to be? And he makes he analyzes that, which is an impossible. How could an impossible thing could take place? And he makes a series of analysis in these quotes that I don't know. I found it amazing that he's basically trying to not justify it but describe it, right?
Yes.
It's more descriptive than deductive. So he says that, first of all, the principle behind this tipping over from inexistent to absolute existent, worldly appearing, is an evanescent principle. The event consumes its own power in this. It's like event becomes, the site is maximal, but then it extinguishes itself. It's like empties out itself in order to bring something of its own, like a child, to this world.
This is a really beautiful sentence, that because you know, Zizek has this idea that he assumes it's an opposite idea to Badiou. He calls the self-erasing event. This idea of the vanishing mediator, something that causes the world to tip over a certain point, but once that tipping over happens, retroactively, you think there was a continuation. And I think that this sentence actually goes exactly the same direction, right? I mean, at the cusp of an event, or from a sort of impossible position, like in an event horizon, it seems like what's beyond the form what's beyond the form of the object, what's inside of it, is formless, is being, right? You seem like you're at the edge of being itself. And this is, let's say, the sort of Heideggerian moment of the phenomenology of this impossible movement. But once you look inside and you see there is actually organized stuff, right? So timber has a structure. There is no being at stake. There is timber at stake, right?
Different scale.
Yeah, you change the scale, and then that thing that was out of focus gets into focus. And that sort of dark night of a event horizon, you know, it's actually filled with content. So once you cross that frontier, there was no frontier to cross. I mean, it looks like a qualitative frontier from the side of the world, and the inside of atoms, there is like this unformed matter. But once you probe, you zoom in into it, and you see that it's actually structured, and you can actually derive things from it. The things don't look the same from both sides, right?
Yeah. That is that I thought that from the limited Wikipedia reading of Notal, I thought that is what he's saying, that there are, within each boundary, you have a set of rules that are completely chaotic and ununderstandable from outside. But once you get to that boundary, it has its own. It's like a language that is not understandable. And like the world of physics is like that to some degree, right? I mean, to some degree, gravity and electromagnetic rules are completely gibberish to each other. One acts on huge distances, one acts on very small distances, and they are like talking past each other. They are not reconcilable, and hence the problem of the unified theory. But when you go inside, 1 degree closer, like somewhere within the black hole, then you can describe that in the language of string theory. In the language of string theory, then there is no electromagnetic and graviton kind of distinction. It's just excited strings, if you will. Anyway, I mean that's just
no, but I think it's a perfect example. I mean, that I like that a lot, like because it goes into this sort of drawing we were playing with, right? At a certain scale, this is the minimal. If this is our distance measure, right? This is below the size of what we can measure. So this is unformed, right?
Yeah.
If you change it to a smaller one, a smaller measure, you can actually, let's say, probe into this thing here, right? With that, and then you have its own rules, its own metrics, right? So there is a shift of perspective, like a scalar shift of perspective, where from outside, so from a previously understandable form, this looks like it's formless. But when that shift of perspective happened from this to this has form, right? So you never get really to have an experience. I mean, this is why I think it's interesting, because you never really get the move from the unknown, like the move of novelty is only rhetorically the move from the unknown to the known, because the unknown, it participates in the knowledge. So there is something of knowledge already there, right? It's not like simply I'm taking something formless and putting it into a form.
It's very similar to, we mentioned that last time. I think, again, the language of theory of the subject is probably a lot superior in this discussion, that the cause and consistency. We are looking at the form as the cause, whereas the matter itself is the source of consistency that contributes to the consistency as well. It's just when is looked at from the perspective of the cause, it looks chaotic. So the whole discussion that Badiou has in encountering the Chinese wall between symbolic and the real, that this Chinese wall actually is a matter of perspective, is a matter of a scale. What is to a certain scale is being treated as non-symbolizable, to another scale is full of symbolic signifiers. You can produce and discover signifiers.
I like that very much. I mean, you're right. I think that the language of theory of the subject, especially the cause and consistency distinction, is very good, because you can, as we were saying, you need both to have self-causation, because if self-causation is to be a relation, it needs to consist. It's not enough that it's self-belonging, because it can be just a paradox. And at the level of the paradox, right, just as a cause, it can simply be reintegrated, because it brings new information to the table, but it doesn't bring new consistency to that information. So the only way you can make it consist is reintegrate it back into your previous view of the world. Like, crazy things happen, man. That's like, that crazy thing in the factory that happened. It's different to extract consistency from the site, right? So,
and it shows again, like, goes back to this obsession that I have in Badiou's that how much consistent this guy has been over the years. Yes. I mean, he has not changed his position much.
Yeah,
it's not true. That in being an event or logics of words. I mean, he has acquired the new tools in order to explicate what he wants to say. But as a matter of fact, his vision is considerably consistent.
I think he would say it's because the way that he presents it, it's so it supposedly follows so directly from an actual empirical kind of testimony that this exists, right? That you are almost convinced that it exists for the simple fact that somebody could keep his eye on a specific idea for so long.
It has a point de capitan.
Yeah.
So that's the first comment. Then he says, furthermore, if the inexistence of the site must finally attain maximal intensity in the order of appearing, it is only to the extent that it now stands in the place of what has disappeared. So basically he's saying there is a price that you have to pay, and this price is something that the transcendental, the law of appearing makes us to pay. So it is not like the new world is going to be willy-nilly, like you said. The new world that basically brings an existence to the fore, to maximal, to absolute existence, has to make another atom, if you will, another entity inexistent.
Also, I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, I mean, I think a really good example of this is, we got your Nat Coleman example, but it's amazing how there is a passage from the inexistent to a new consistency. Like, the new consistency is what is left of the inexistent, because the statement of what took place is not, or Nat Coleman used his weird technique in that moment, but weird techniques can participate in the consistency of music. Like, the entailment, the form of entailment that happened in the self-causation, that persists, but the object that was self-caused disappears. it's
The
not that
trace of it.
singular object, right?
Yeah,
It's
the
this,
trace of it is, he calls it the trace.
yeah, the trace of it is the possibility of a new consistency, is not
Yeah.
the thing that caused the new consistency, right?
Right. And it's important to say the possibility of consistency because we still have two more theories to cover, theory of points, and it's not the be all end all. So it is exactly a commencement that allows a recommencement.
Yeah,
So,
I think that that's really, I mean, I wish I had being at event at hand here, because that's one of my favorite passages in the book where he says that events don't prescribe the form of fidelity. Like, sure, you can be faithful to something, but being faithful is also coming up with what it means to be faithful to that thing. So the statement, timber can participate in musical material, doesn't include what it means for timber to participate in musical material. It just contains the possibility, like that possibility appears and it can be stated, but it doesn't include anything else in itself.
Exactly. It does not include how the exact engagement works.
Yeah.
Each engagement is different. Each entailment is different.
Yeah, I think that's very crucial.
So this is the second point he's making about this impossibility. The third point that he makes, it is through the existence of the inexistent that the subversion of appearing by being, which underlies it, unfolds within appearing itself. This is the logical indication of a paradox of being, an ontological chimera. Of course, we recognize within it the trace of the vanished event to which, ever since Book 1, we have accorded the power to orient a subjectivizable body. Yes, this epsilon from which stems the subjective power of the body is nothing other than the over existence which affects the proper inexistent of an object of the world when this object is event site. And the last point he's making is there where existence now stands, the inexistent must return. The worldly order is not subverted to the point of being able to demand that a logical law of words be abolished. Every object has the proper inexistent, and if the latter sublimates itself as the trace whence a subject proceeds in absolute existence, another element of the site must cease to exist in order for the law to be safeguarded and the coherence of appearing to be ultimately preserved. I mean, it is very important for Badiou that the new is embedded, the truth is embedded. Mm-hmm. That at the end of the day, it is the same situation that you are dealing with. It has to be embedded. And that is important from a materialist point of view, that what event does and even what subject does happens within the world already as an imminent participation, if you will. It's not like you're throwing something away, baby with the bathwater kind of thing. I mean, you're keeping, you're within that world altogether. So the last one is destruction. And the point here is that the existence of what exists means the destruction of something in the world. We said that. The coming to be of the inexistent destroys what had legitimized this in existence. So there is a law within the world that excludes, say, Aboriginals, the Indians, to be counted as Quebecois, if you remember that example. An event by making those Indians, like the event of the golf course or whatever, all of a sudden makes that Quebecois to recognize a body, if you will, a group of a group of Indians that were not counted before at all, right? So there was what does that mean? That means that from now on, the rule that counted them as non-existent has changed. So the definition, if you will, definition of Quebecois has changed to include those Indians. So this is what I think he means by event is changing the transcendental of the world, by saying that what was previously getting a value of the nil in the situation or in the world is no longer is getting that value, is getting some other value. In this case, a maximal value. Like, for example, in the case of that event of the golf course protest was getting a maximal value because the Indians were occupying the golf course, and there was so much news and so much what was happening around that event. And same way in Paris, from the way that Badiou explains the event of the Paris Commune, they were after the canons. So canons within the Paris Commune had a maximal degree of existence. That was the reason they attacked Paris, because they wanted to confiscate those canons. What they did not count were the worker women. They did not count them at all. They did not think that they would participate. They would even participate, let alone would be the main force in order to push back the detachments and the hooligans and rebels that not rebels, but what's rebels, rebels who actually came to attack the city. So that's exactly what this Paris Commune means. That if in fact canons, if Paris Commune, the event of Paris, the singularity of Paris Commune came to underscore the value of the canons, then it would be a weak consequence, because the value of the canons were already known. What this came to emphasize was the value of women workers in that situation. Not that canons were not important, canons were important, but what came to exist could not be canons, which already had a maximal existence. So this point, I think, is important. That's what, to me, means the changing of the transcendental. For example, the Paris Commune extinguished its own existence to destroy the form of subjection that meant the inexistence of the proletariat as a political power. For the war to resume, the ongoing regime of appearing after the incision that was made to it by the being that underlies it, there has to be a regathering of the transcendental, which must account for what has been destroyed and what has been born. The subject comes to live in a world that is post-evental, who grafts itself to the trace of what has come to pass, which is also eternal. Okay, so those are two quotes. I think both of them are good. But let's move on. I think we covered most of it before. So we have a definition of modification, a formal definition, the process under which a multiple in the process of becoming an object in the world receives various degrees of intensity for its objects. And he makes an example that all objects are subject to modification because all objects most likely contain elements that receives different values for their intensities.
Even goes to the point of saying that modification is equal to objectivation, right?
Yeah, it goes to the point to say that it's the very process of objectivation. It's very important. Sight is a multiple that is affected by self-belonging. A sight is thereby a sudden lifting of the axiomatic prohibition at the level of ontology, through which the possibility of impossible comes to be. At the phenomenological or logical level, this impossibility that has become possible is for an object to appear under rule of the multiple being and the rule of the word, and not the rule of the word transcendental, which I think we have plenty of examples, the example of timbre and grain and voice and the teaching examples. We completely understand this. This appearing under its own transcendental field and the jurisdiction of its own objectivation is unstable. The breakage of the axiomatic fidelity, although could happen, cannot endure. I think this point is again comes back to the earlier point that I was saying, that for Badiou, it is very, very important for event to be evanescent, that we come back and return to the situation.
Yeah.
And we don't stay in an excited mode. That's a very important thing, and he always.
Yeah, but
so,
I mean, I think it's more than that. I mean, what you call this excited mode, where matter participates in the form. I think that it's not only a, let's say, it's not a description of. I mean, I would go as far as using that paradox of self-belonging to extend it to this point, right? I mean, an event that continues to appear as an event is not an event. I mean, I was talking with Caron about this, like let's say,
a very good way of saying it.
Passion that only appears as love, if it appears as intense passion, itself is not appearing as such. As
love.
Right, so it's not really a matter of, let's say, describing the life cycle of the event. It quickly disappears as it appears. Is that
exactly
turning into something else that it totally erases its disruptive effect and makes it appear as consistency, right? To use the theory of the subject language, like that a cause, something which is causal or interruptive, appears as consistency. That erasure is the appearance, right?
Yeah.
If it endured qua rupture, it wouldn't be what it is.
It would be a rupture. It wouldn't be a rupture.
Yeah, exactly.
So we saw what differentiates singularity from fact. The question is what. So a fact is when the existence of A is P, and this value of P is different than M, is less than M, then the object is a fact. Singularity is if the existence of A is maximal. A real and absolute consequence is that if you take two elements, one implicates the other, X implicates Y, denoting the consequence of X on Y. If this implication has the value of M, we call EX implying EY a strong absolute or real consequence, or we say X really affects Y in that case. But it's important that this grammar is a global grammar. The grammar of consequence is compatible with the rest of the transcendental. So it's not a grammar of event. It does not create a disruption or singularity if maximally causing something. A fact can also follow this grammar. So it is important again to language of, it is the language of cause is completely contained. It is when cause relates to consistency that it changes or creates a new consistency. It is that.
For example, we could say something like the violin was trained by the music playing and a lot of grain was listenable in the sound. You can just use the language of causation to say something like, well, don't strain the violin that much. that's cause. If you do something different, that won't happen. Like that's still cause, right?
Right.
It eventual because that causal language now is kind of caught up in a different consistency.
Exactly. Exactly. Points to something that is beyond itself.
Yeah.
For example, if existence of A is P, we can still maintain that EA causes EY with the condition that EY is greater than or equal to EA. So for example, Paris Commune could, like what Badiou says, shine so much, it's so important. Well, it is the most important thing, and it was the most important thing for the army and the army backed by Prussia. But if you recall in the summary that Badiou made, it was important for the wrong reason because of the 200 or 300 cannons that they had, right? Mm-hmm. So if this event, Paris Commune, which was the gathering of the, basically defending Paris, having all the brigades and having all the fences and stuff, and the army, the Prussian army could not penetrate Paris. People actually protected Paris. If this important event, or this important singularity, which is Prussia could not penetrate Paris, whereas the rest of the army of the Second Empire basically rendered itself, relinquished, and was defeated, acquiesced to the Prussian army. So that was already a singularity. But if that singularity only meant to say how important the cannons were, that was the only consequence, that would be EA causing EY, where EY is already an M.
Uh-huh.
So that was not a strong consequence. This means that a fact can only affect those beings whose intensity of appearance is greater than its own, which is a site is a singularity if what its consequences of existence weaker than its own, as the case for absolute non-existence of the object not, as we saw previously. The example that you provide is brilliant. If Paris Commune had mobilized the strongly existent, like the bourgeois, the military, and in my example, the cannons, then it would not have been a singularity because they already have intense existence in the world of Paris in September 1871. The reason that it is a candidate for an event is because the Paris Commune mobilized the non-existence in the world. It gave them existence, so to speak. So he defines formally event as a singularity when what is being consequenced, which is Y, the element Y, has a nil existence, or it is a not within that object. So in fact, EA is implicating E naught. This implication has the maximal degree. This equation is impossible because this implies that E naught is greater than EA, which is a contradiction because we already assumed EA is M. This is what Dennis was saying. But this is according to the dominant logic of the world. In the case of an event, logic takes back its rights. The consequence of event is the absolute existence of the proper in existence. This is the generic form of the eventual trace in book 1 named an epsilon. I like this quote that he says, that which in appeared now shines like a sun.
But you need to always end it with a bang.
So we saw this already.
Yeah.
And I think the last piece, which is destruction and recasting of transcendental, we talked about it. Basically says that when this element becomes unexistent, another element he calls, say, delta, has to become, which has a value of P, must die. So he defined dying or death as the process that an element of an object that had a non-nil value of existence because of circumstances outside of the composition of that element disappears in the world, or its existence becomes nil.
From the outside, right?
From outside.
I just realized recently that Badiou's definition of death as being a worldly affair and not an intrinsic affair, right? We already actually speak of it in these terms. Like when we ask to somebody something that died, it died of natural causes, right? Natural causes is not a reference to the thing itself, to a power of dying. It's a passive reference to the world.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, if you include all the other causes for dying, you would say it died of worldly causes. Mm-hmm. Right? Like cancer or some accident. Everything comes from the outside. That death is not an intrinsic capacity in that sense.
Yeah. That's true.
It's not a singular capacity.
Yeah. So here again is another reference to the change to the transcendental, I think, which is the upshot of all this, that the event, there is for event to be an event, it has to so-called, quote unquote, sacrifice itself. But there is a trace, or there is a permanent effect of the event on the transcendental, which is completely objective, and it does not require the figure of the subject. And that was the change within the transcendental. For the regime of the worldly appearing to reconstitute itself, it needs to adjust itself in order to give new values to the appearance of different things, different elements. Or in particular case, in a site, it has to adjust itself in order to give a maximal value of existence to an inexistent, and a minimal value to something that existed before. So this is an objective, it seems to me, objective impact that event has. And if you say in one of, or some of our conversation before, this must be happening in any world all the time, without a subject ever arises or grafts itself or recognizes the trace of event. So this must be happening objectively within any world all the time. So that is the end. That is the end of this book.
It's the commencement, in fact.
It's the commencement. We go to the now interesting stuff. Theory of points and body, and I can't wait, man. I can't wait to get to those and get to the new projects. It's such a so I will post this presentation.
Yeah, please do so. We can upload it to the you can just upload it on the website.
Yeah, when you load the, so what's the process? You create a page for the
I can
YouTube
create the
video?
meeting page, and if you want, you can just send it to me. I can just paste it there. It's easy.
Okay, sounds good. I'll do that.
Great, guys. I need to run. I need to finish cooking dinner.
Okay.
Okay, guys. It was a great meeting.
Thank you, Reza. That was great.
Thank you
See you
very
guys.
much. Take care.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.